Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to the Roundup. This is a podcast featuring voices, opinions, and perspectives from interesting people in the Cowboy State. I'm your host, Wendy Core, and today's guest, you all know him, you all love him, you all rely on Don Day and his forecasts from Dayweather. And today we get to talk to Don and get behind the scenes with Don Day. Don, hello, welcome.
Hi, Wendy. Glad to be here.
We are awfully glad that you're here. This is going to be, I've really been looking forward to this because you're a presence in people's everyday lives. And so I just kind of want to give people a glimpse into a little bit behind the scenes with Don Day. So let's just start off with Don, where are you from?
Okay, well, I was originally born in Denver. That's something I don't admit to. Born in Denver, spent some time in Michigan as my dad moved around. Soon as I graduated high school, which was actually just outside of Detroit, I moved to Wyoming, moved to Cheyenne, and went to Laramie County Community College for a year, then transferred to the University of Wyoming, and I've been here since. And the reason that I came out to Wyoming is that my mom was born and raised in Cheyenne, and my dad was based at F.E. Warren in the Air Force. So that's how I ended up coming to be here. And so every summer, we would vacation in Wyoming. My grandparents had a cabin up in the Snowy Range Mountains in a little place called Keystone. And every summer we would come to Wyoming, and ever since I could remember, all I wanted to do is wait till summer so I could come out west because I just loved it. And so as soon as I graduated from high school, I rented a U-Haul and I headed west.
I think that's a lot of people's stories. I know that's how we got to Wyoming when I was a kid, vacation out here. So you're very similar in that way. So what did you study when you came to Laramie County Community College?
Well, when I came out, I always had been fascinated by the weather. In fact, loved it. And I really wanted to go into it. And I'll be honest, I was terrified of the math and physics that you have to take to become a meteorologist. My second love was broadcasting. I grew up listening to the radio every night. Whether it's sports or listening to weather people, I just loved radio. And so I went into broadcast journalism my first, let's say, 3 semesters of college. I was a broadcast journalism major. But when I transferred over to UW, my advisor in the journalism department said, you should really take Intro to Meteorology because you never know if you're in broadcasting, they may throw you up there in front of a camera and do the weather one day. And I got really excited. I said, oh man, I would love to take that because I love weather. And really that was my true passion at the time. And so what I did was I took the Intro to Meteorology with a professor who ended up being my mentor. His name was Augie Auer. Some people may remember taking him in the late 80s or early 90s at the University of Wyoming. And he just got my passion for meteorology going again. And as soon as I took that course, I kind of knew where I wanted to go. And so what I did was I got out of that. And so I ended up going from broadcast journalism to the hard physical sciences, which wasn't an easy transition.
I think that it's fascinating that you knew what you wanted. You knew what you wanted from a young age, and here you are still doing it and doing it so successfully. I mean, you are Wyoming's weatherman. And tell me about the transition there. How did you then kind of branch out on your own? What was your career path until you became Dayweather?
Well, so I graduated in the early 90s. And at that point in time, the field of meteorology was, you kind of had 3 places you could go. You could go into media, you could go into broadcast, do weather on TV or something of that vein. You could go work for the government, the National Weather Service, and you could also go into the military and further your training and getting some expertise. So the amount of jobs aren't nearly like they are now. But the opportunities were there. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to go work for the National Weather Service. I always thought that that would be a good career path that you can take you to places all around the country, and you can get into research and that type of thing. And so I uh, befriended what was then the meteorologist in charge at the Cheyenne Forecast Office. And so when I graduated, I had all my paperwork in, and I was hired to go work at the time, Sheridan. The Sheridan area actually had a office, a weather service office. It was really my dream job because it was a office that didn't have what you call warning responsibilities. It was an 8 to 5 job. Now, 8 to 5 jobs in the weather business are almost unheard of. And so I loved the Sheridan area. I thought, oh my gosh, this is great. And so basically, I had a job lined up to start late summer, early fall, right after graduation. So I pretty much had my career path set. Unfortunately, there was a law passed called the Graham-Rudman Act, which was actually a federal hiring freeze. And so I was really weeks away from starting my job, got a phone call and said, there's a hiring freeze. You're hired, but you're not hired. And you're just going to have to wait for it to open up again. So funny how things work out, right? So it was certainly a setback. And so I asked the Weather Service, I said, well, how long do you think this will last? And they said, well, this is politics, and this could go 6 months, 12 months, or 18 months. And I go, what do I do? It's like, well, deliver pizzas. Like, well, I've done that before. So I was single at the time, probably living on $400 or $500 a month. And I said, you know what I can do is when I was in Laramie, part of my recreation money, gas money, beer money was I actually worked at Wyoming Public Radio. So I did everything from news to sports. I did overnight DJ shifts. I had a show I ran in the summer one year. It went from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. where I played new age music for 6 hours. How's that?
I actually have a similar story. So yes, I get it.
So I had a lot of radio experience. And so at that point in time, I was hearing other people doing weather on the radio. And I thought of the Paul Harvey model or the Rush Limbaugh model, which is get a bunch of radio stations to take your program and then sell advertising with your program. So while I was waiting for the Weather Service job to open up, I just cold called radio stations in Wyoming and Nebraska and Colorado and say, hey, I've got radio experience. How about I be your weatherman? And even better, it'll be free. And they said, sure, why not? I mean, they're offering something for free, and weather and radio goes together really well. So basically, I got 14 radio stations together, and I started just doing it out of my 1-bedroom apartment on my kitchen table, doing it through the phone, and doing phone feeds and doing it all off the top of my head and putting it together. But that broadcast experience I gained really, really helped. And so long story short, it was about 20 months. And I got a call from the Weather Service that says your job's open. And at that point in time, I could see that maybe I could make this work. I wasn't making any money, but I was able to start getting advertisers on my program by then. I had been on long enough, but it was very lean for me for a year and a half. I remember getting an ad buy for $130. And I remember living off of that for probably 2 weeks. So I went back and I said, listen, I think this idea I've got might work. Would I burn any bridges if I passed up this opportunity now and reapplied later? And they were very gracious and they said, sure. But it was very difficult because I was giving up security. I was giving up pension, health insurance, all of those things. But I was in my mid-20s, and if there was a time to take a chance, then, and I have always been of the entrepreneur. I was always the kid with the lemonade stand. I was always somewhat of an entrepreneur. I had a paper out when I was 10 or 11. So work didn't bother me at all. So basically I passed it up. And so here I am right now, still doing what I've been doing. Now I've branched out into other things, weather related, but still the broadcasting side of thing is still my main focus.
So let's talk about the branching out. This is fascinating. I love the fact that you started out as an entrepreneur and you are still doing day weather that you started out with back in the mid 90s. I think that that's fantastic and it's a success story right there. But let's talk about the branching out, which is we did a story for Cowboy State Daily earlier this year, or actually earlier last year, about hot air balloons. And I want to know, Don, about how you got hooked up with setting hot air balloon Guinness records. Tell me about this.
Yeah, it's a crazy story, but it all has to do with a black lab named Murphy. So you're saying, well, how
Okay,
does
this is great. Yeah.
so how does a black Labrador get into this mix? Well, so I was newly married. My wife and I took Murphy for a walk. Murphy needed a walk. So anybody that knows Labradors know that they need seven to 10 walks a day. So we walked to the park and there was somebody, a group of people setting up a hot air balloon. And so we went over and started talking to them. And my wife had a hot air balloon fly over her house when she was a kid in Laramie and just had been infatuated with hot air balloons ever since. The people were very nice. And then they found out I was a weather person. And weather and balloons are very, very well connected, like anything in aviation. Next thing you know, we're out helping them crew, helping them put the system together. They invited us. They had a club. We could join the club. And the next thing you know, a couple of years later, we both become hot air balloon pilots. And what ended up happening is that it's a small community. There's maybe 3,000 or 4,000 balloon pilots registered in the United States. But you end up meeting people and you end up connecting with people and networking. And since I was a meteorologist and a hot air balloon pilot, that gave me a unique skill set. And then later on down the road, we met some friends, some balloonists in Albuquerque who were involved in other balloon projects that involved high altitude research, which means taking balloons to very high altitudes. And the people that were running these programs were contractors associated with the Air Force and Space Missile Command and all of those things. And I got introduced to one of the meteorologists who was a consultant in some of these programs, and he fell ill. And he said, there's a special project that's going to involve a very large balloon flight at White Sands Missile Range, part of the government project. Could you fill in for me? And you have some experience with balloons in the weather. At that time, I had very little experience. And so I went down there and performed that job, and we had a successful mission. But it was baptism by fire, because you're talking about going from the size of a hot air balloon, which is 2 or 3 stories high, to balloons that are all of a sudden hundreds of feet long and wide. And what happened over time was I ended up taking over for him. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a new part of my business, which was consulting for lighter than air projects, whether they're large stratospheric balloons or airships. And in 2012, I was hired on to be a consultant for the Red Bull Stratos project, which was a record attempt to have someone skydive from the stratosphere and set world records. And that was a life-changing project for me, because all of a sudden I was involved in some very intense, high-risk projects in terms of having a person on board, being a live television event, and all of those things. And ever since then, I find myself busy every year on a variety of different projects. And I've ended up on a lot of record-breaking projects, because if you're going to break a record in aviation, whether it's from a balloon or a helicopter or any type of aircraft, you need a weather element. You need someone there to do the weather. And also, I have gotten involved in airspace, FAA things where that expertise is needed.
So let's talk about where you get the information for not only your high altitude projects, but also your day-to-day information. What do you rely on for your what? Because everybody's like, the weather's always unpredictable and the weatherman's wrong half the time. You are a trusted voice. People trust what you say. Tell us where you get your information.
Well, thank goodness for the internet. When I first started, I had to acquire satellite dishes, satellite receivers, because at that time, now this is, goes back to as late as the late 90s. Before the internet really got going, you had to pull in all your weather charts, your satellite photos, a lot of your radar information via satellite. Now that we've got the internet, I can use the internet for, and most of what I look at, honestly, just about anybody, if they want to and they know where to look, can look at the same information I see. But I use a variety of weather tools that's generated by the National Weather Service, NOAA, but I also have access to worldwide modeling that comes from Japan, Europe, France, Canada, Brazil. I look at a variety of different things, and the internet makes it all worthwhile. But like any business, anything that you're involved in, your experience over time really helps formulate, the final product. And weather forecasting is very much a combination of technology, the tools, and also experience. And the further along you go, the better the weather forecast you get, because you just start to see patterns. You start to see things that have happened before. You also start to find out where the models are good and the weather models are bad. But it wasn't without, you still, to this day, I've been doing this for 33 some years. You're still faced with challenges despite the technology, despite the speed of our computers, despite our increased knowledge of the atmosphere. It is still very, very difficult to forecast, but the demands of the public keep getting more intense. Public and industry wants more and more, and not necessarily our forecasting has been able to keep up with that pace. So that offers up a lot of challenges. I mean, I remember when I started, one of the best phone calls I ever got was, I think it was a woman from Lusk. She called me and she says, "Hey, would you come up and get 9 inches of partly cloudy off my driveway?" So
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
so you learn from your mistakes. You find out where it went wrong, and then you try to fix it with the next opportunity that comes up.
So, how long does it take you then to prep your weather forecasts? I'm assuming you do it the day before to prep. Obviously, you do it the day before to prep for the next day. And how long does it take you to gather all of your information and then put it all together in a way that is user friendly for us? Because, like you say, we can get that information and the data anywhere, but we don't have your experience to interpret that into something meaningful. How long does it take you to turn that data into something meaningful?
Well, I'll tell you, my day starts at 3:15 in the morning, and to have the best weather information is to have the most recent weather information. So believe it or not, I cannot look at something at 6 o'clock at night and expect that weather information to still be good at 3 o'clock in the morning. So I've just learned over time that I constantly am looking at the weather. I'm constantly looking at charts, constantly looking at satellite imagery, 7 days a week. We get new models every 6 hours. So you have to keep up on it. Even, let's say, when I'm not working on a weekend, I'm still looking. So I'm still working in the sense that I'm still looking at what the weather is, because it's so changeable that if you wait too long between your updates. So honestly, Wendy, I do most of what I do off the top of my head, because I've been doing this so long. I can look at something and be able to generate what I want to communicate fairly quickly. When I first started, I would hand write out a script. I would make a It started out with writing a script, then it moved to doing an outline, to where when I got more and more radio stations, I did not have time to prepare a script for each one. And I can't do the same forecast in Casper as I do in Green River because the weather's different. So I learned how to put it together and come up with a way I can put this all off the top of my head and hit record and go.
That's impressive, honestly. So you're talking about 7 days a week, you're looking at the weather. When do you take a vacation, Don?
Weather never takes a vacation. And this is one of the, I got a lot of advice when I first started. One of the pieces of advice, and this is what I tell younger people who approach me and say, hey, I want to be a meteorologist. And the first thing you tell them is to say, well, it's very rewarding. It's very challenging. However, there's weather on Christmas. There's weather on New Year's. There's weather on your birthday. It's a 24/7 endeavor in the sense that you have to be watching it all the time. So you just kind of become accustomed to it. And it is very difficult to remove yourself completely from it. I will tell you, if I go 2 or 3 days without looking at a weather chart, I start to get a twitch, because you're so used to it.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you get to take, I mean, obviously you do hot air ballooning and things like that. So I assume that you get to take vacations every once in a while.
Yeah, every once in a while, and I try to do that. I try to do that more often, and try to catch up on my sleep, which is the hardest part.
Who takes over for you? Who
So
does
I've got a
Dayweather?
great staff. I've got a lot of people will be familiar with the name Mark Hewer, who's been with me over 20 some years, helping to fill in for broadcasting, and Don Watzel is another meteorologist that helps me out. Jim Worshborn is another one that I've been working with since all the way back into the early 90s. So I do have staff that helps out, but my business is just not broadcasting. We do this high altitude consulting. We also do consulting for departments of transportation, building contractors. When you're in the private weather business, which is what I'm in, is you have to have a variety of different clients, different bases to go on to formulate your business. So that's one thing I had to learn, is I just can't stand on one thing. And I always joke with people. I said, if you're going to be a private meteorologist, you got to be right 51% of the time, because people pay you to make a forecast. And so you have a little bit more pressure than other fields of meteorology, to where, well, it's implied there's a good chance that you're going to be wrong some of the time. But we have to be just a little bit better than that to pay the mortgage.
Absolutely. Now let's talk real quickly, because a lot of people follow you on YouTube. You have a podcast. So like you say, you've branched out of just broadcasting. Tell us about when you decided, you know what, we're going to go internet based. We're going to go to YouTube and these other things, and how that increased your following.
Well, yeah. So I have to give credit where credit's due. I had a listener, a radio listener in Casper, send me an email one day and said, hey, you should start doing a podcast. And I said, okay, why not? There's a lot of things I've done in my business for free where there's no guarantee that what you're going to do is going to end up producing any revenue. Because let's face it, anybody and their brother can start a podcast. How do you monetize that podcast and get enough people? I mean, if you're Joe Rogan, you have so many people listening, you're going to do well. Let's face it, in Wyoming, we don't have a population base to where you can produce a lot of numbers to generate those types of things. And so it started very simply, just doing an audio podcast, and just he helped me a lot, how to set it up and software to use and how to do those types of things. And it grew from that to where we found out you had the ability to put graphics with your audio. And that's where we went into the YouTube realm, to where you could explain to people what you're trying to explain from on a radio standpoint, but the YouTube format allows you to show maps and satellite imagery and show why you're thinking what you're thinking, and be able to do that. And what I love about it is there are no hard or fast rules. There's no format you have to follow. You can kind of just create your own program and everything else. And it really has taken off. It's exceeded my expectations. And I have also found out that we've got a lot of people in other states that watch it that have some connection to Wyoming. But they also realize that if they can watch what's happening in Wyoming's weather, they can kind of infer what's going on in their state that's close by.
What is it, do you think, Don, that is special about your podcast that makes people from other states listen to you over their local weatherman?
Well, I will be honest and forthcoming about our confidence level. A lot of times when you get a forecast, it's a forecast, but there's never anything with it that says this is an 8 out of 10 confidence level. This is a 1 out of 10 confidence level. I think what's different is number one, I show them what I see. This is what I see, and I want to show you what I see, and then I want you to show you what my challenges are to try to make the forecast. So basically, I'm letting them in to the insight of how the forecast is made. And if I tell them I don't know what's going to happen or I have a low confidence, I do. And I also think that by me explaining what I see, they learn something. They learn how the atmosphere works. I'll try to throw in some educational morsels here and there. And there are a lot of people who are weather nerds. I'm a weather nerd that just love weather, and so if they have the ability to not only learn something, but also get the forecast at the same time, that format, the podcast format, gives me the ability to do that I can't do with a 30-second forecast on the radio.
And we are all the beneficiaries of this. So we are grateful. Don, this has been a fascinating look behind the scenes of a very successful weather enterprise that you've created, that you say you're going on 33 years now of doing this. And do you see yourself doing this for years to come yet? Are you going to slow down at all?
I would like to slow down and catch up on my sleep. I mean, getting up at 3:00 every morning for 30 some years does get to you after a while, but I see myself being involved for quite a bit longer.
We are glad for that. Don, thank you so much for being our guest today on the Roundup. This has been just a lot of fun. And of course, you and I have known each other for years, just through Cowboy State Daily and other broadcasting. And it's been fun to kind of get to know who you are, as opposed to just hearing your voice. So thanks a lot, Don.
Thanks, Wendy.
And folks, thank you for tuning into our podcast, The Roundup. I'm your host, Wendy Core. Tune in next week as we chat with another great Wyoming personality about news and views that are important to you. Have a great week.